Hello and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to create our first Node.js application. We are going to follow a few steps to create the application. The first step, we are going to import the required module. In the second step, we are going to create the server. In the third step, we are going to implement the request and response. I'm going to be using the Sublime text editor for this lecture for the duration of the course. So if you have got Sublime text as well, if you click on the Sublime text 3, that should launch it. If you are using the free edition, you should have it unregistered in parentheses here. Don't worry about that. It will still work. It just means that you haven't paid for it yet. Next thing I'm going to do is save this file here. I'm going to save it as a JS file. JavaScript is used to write Node.js applications. So I'm going to click Save As. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and I'm going to save it as an index.js. So I'll click save. I'm saving as index.js because Node.js files are written in JavaScript. .js means JavaScript. Click save. And you can see this is the file here saved. So anything we write, any code we write inside this text editor will be saved as a JavaScript file. To save time, I've already written the code for our first application. So I'm just going to run through the code with you line by line. So on line 1 here is just a comment where you see the / here is a comment. When the code runs, the comments are ignored. So this is a comment telling you that requiring the HTTP interfaces in the node. So we are actually importing the required module here in line 1. Line 2 is where we've declared the variable we've called the HTTP. And we've set it to equals to the require directive. So this require directive will load the HTTP module and store the returned HTTP instance into an HTTP variable. Here on line 4 is a comment just explaining that we are creating an HTTP server to handle the request and response. So here on line 5 here, I've used the created the HTTP instance and call the http.createServer method. This is a method, this createServer method here, to create a server instance. And then we bind it to port 8080. So the binding is here. So this way it's got listing here. This create server here. This parentheses to here. These are all belong to this create server method. So this is all the code that will be executed for the create server method or function. So the create server method takes in two parameters here, a request and a response. For short, I've just shortened into REQ and REST. It's also, you can also write it as request and then response. And then between these parentheses, these curly braces here is the code that will be executed when this method is called. So here on line 7 is a comment saying that I'm sending a response header of 200 OK. What that means is that if everything is okay, if it's been interpreted okay by the server, it will return this response 200. Response 200 means that everything is okay. Server got the message, understood it, interpreted it, and sent it back. So line 8 here, this is the response, the write head, and we pass it a status code, which is 200. That means it will return that code if everything is successful and checks out okay. And then the value here is going to be a content-type, and it's going to be a text/plain text. So this is the type of content that will be returned. It just tells you the type, which is going to be a plain text. And then here on line 10, it's just a comment to say it's going to print out hello world. So this is the response. So the end response will be res.end, and in parentheses, it will print out this text hello world on the web browser. So this port here basically is bounded to the server. So it gives the server what port to use to display the application or the output for the application. So the server will listen out for port 8080 on your local port. If that port is used, it will tell you it is used. So, but if it's empty, it will display this hello world for that port. And then in order to test your code, once your code is completed on the console means we're going to run this either on the terminal or command prompt. When we run it, it will tell you, if you log the console.log, it will tell you the server is running. It will tell you the port on which the server is running. Once you've got that confirmed, you can launch your browser as a local host, and it will display this content hello world. So this is the code basically for your first web application. So once you've got your code in there, just click on file and save all. Now, if I exit this is our code here in our node. This is index.js. So this is the code we have written for our application. So how do we run this code? Because it's a console app, we are going to run it in our console. So if you're on the Mac, go to your terminal. If you're in Windows, click on the command prompt. CMD will launch the command prompt. So this is our application code here. To run the application, you first of all need to navigate to the directory. So I'm going to do dir for directory, and I'm going to go to the desktop because it's on my desktop. So I'm going to change directory to desktop, cd desktop, and press enter. Now I'm in my desktop directory. To run the application, all I need to do is type in node space and then the name of the application, which is this, of the file, which is index.js. If I press enter, it will tell me the console is running. If everything checks out okay. All right, okay, I've got some error message here. The reason I am getting an error here, notice it's saying here, is listening out for port 8080, and it appears that port 8080 is in use because I've got other stuff running on my computer, so it looks like that port is engaged. So what I need to do, I need to go back to my index.html file and modify that port to another port so that this application can run. So open up your application in the text editor. Just modify the port. If yours is fine, then leave it as it is. 8080 is a popular port. If yours is free, don't change anything. Only change it if you get an error that the port is in use. My port is in use, so I'm going to change this to 8081, and I change that to 8081. I'll go file and I'll go save all. So I've now changed the port. I'll go back and run the application. All right, now that I've changed the port, it should work. So I'm just going to change directory to my desktop. and I'm going to type in node space index.js. That's the name of the application here. You can see here server now running on port 8081 because I've changed it. You notice there's no error. Now if I open up my web browser and go to localhost, so if I type in localhost 8081, it should work because that's the port. You can see there is loaded hello world. So the application is not working correctly. And this is the text. It tells you the server is running on what port. It tells you this is the response. So this is what I expect it to display, hello world, and it is displaying that hello world. So our application is running properly on port 8081. If your port 8080 is free, then yours should say 8080. So 8080 is a preferable one. Unless it is engaged, then you can use 8081. So that's basically it for this lecture. In this lecture, we successfully created our first Node.js console application. Many thanks for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this lecture on the components of a Node.js application. A Node.js application consists of the following three important components. The first is called the import required module. A module basically encapsulates related code into a single unit of code. So when you are creating a module, this can be interpreted as moving all related functions into a file. So when you create a Node.js application, the import required module, basically you need that is a directive. So we use the required directive to load the Node.js module. So this import required module here is used to, it's kind of like it's a required directive to load the Node.js module. I've given an example here. For example, we created a variable called http and we set that to equals to require. So this directive here is what is used to load the module. The next important component is the create server. Okay, so basically the create server, what that does is server which allows you to listen to the client's request, similar to an Apache HTTP server. So this is just a function you create that will listen out to the client's request. I've given an example here. For example, the way you create the server, you use the http.createServer. It's a function, and then you pass it this parameter. You pass it the request, and you also pass it the response as parameters, and whatever else goes in between these curly braces. The other parts of the code goes in between these two curly braces. But the key thing here is how you create a server, and this is the command you use. You create it as a function, and you pass it a request and also pass it a response. The third key component is called the read request and return response. The server you created here, okay, basically will read the HTTP request made by the client, which can be a web browser or a console, and then return that response. So when the server was created, there are two parameters, a request and then a response. So the read request and return response, this is where all the action happens. So the read part of it will read the request, and the response part of it will return the response. Other parts that go with the read request and return response include the send a response. So when you want the server to read a request or interpret a response, you have to send a response header, and this is how you write the response header. So you write the response, you do response on write head, and then you pass it a value for the response header. So what happens after receiving and interpreting a request message? A server responds with an HTTP response message, and there are various status to indicate how successful your command is. So the status code element is usually a 3-digit integer number, where the first digit of the status code defines the class of the response, and the last 2 digits do not have any categorization hole. So the key, there are 5 values for the first digit. For example, if your response is, for example, 1xx, it means the request was received and the process is continuing. If it's a 2xx, like we've got here, we've got 200, that means 2xx. If it's a 2xx, that means the response, it's a success. That means the action was successfully received, it was understood, and it was accepted. So when you are sending a response header, and if you're passing this 200, it means that if the response is successful, this 200 will be returned as okay. That means the response has been actioned, it's been received, understood, and accepted. If this is a 300xx, that means it's a redirection. It means further action must be taken in order to complete the request. If this is a 4xx, that means there's a client error, maybe 404 or 4 whatever. It means the request contains incorrect syntax or cannot be fulfilled. If it's a 5xx, for example 500 and something, it means the server failed to fulfill an apparent valid request. So the header, the response header here, the status code is quite important. This here is known as the status code. It will determine if your request is successful or not. So if you've got a 1xx, that means 100 or 101, whatever, it means it represents information. It means the request was received and it's still processing. If you get 200x, or if you say 200 blah blah blah, it means action successful, understood, and accepted. You can also send a response body as part of the read request and return response. So if you send the response body, you can, for example, you can send a response body as, for example, hello world. The way you write it will be response.end hello world. So that means this will be the end product of the text that will be returned. Another thing you need to specify is the port that your application will run. So the server needs to know what port to listen to. The standard port usually is 8080. So the port where the application will run is 8080. So if that port is used, you can specify a different port where the application will run. So these are the key components of a Node.js application. Many thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Keep learning. Keep practicing. Keep moving toward your career. Keep moving toward your career.